World Championship Candidates. And tonight we'll be watching former world champion JannLee playing mariorton of Mexico. JannLee out of Australia. And you know, guys, I think the match already started. So let's catch up with the first few moves here. mariorton playing white. We will be watching this from the view of JannLee. Symmetrical d4 d5 variation, and I like the way black got an extra pawn in the center, taking control of the e4 square here. Black has already equalized, I think. Very nice little pseudo sacrifice here on f2. He will get back the material directly, and he goes after another pawn, creating even more weaknesses. So this is quickly turning into a massacre, I would say. JannLee in perfect control here as black. Cheers, by the way. So this knight move covering some important squares and also putting some pressure here, but I don't know, is maybe f5 a move? Yeah, he goes for f5. That threatens the knight and also increases the scope of the rook here. It protects f6. And just about everything is hanging here in the white position. And look at those holes on h2 and f2. So, do we have anyone watching? I took a late decision here because I saw they took a late decision also that they were going to play today. And frankly, I don't understand much of that move. The knight is just hanging. Yeah, white resigned. Probably slipped there, but he just got sick and tired of the position. So 1-0 JannLee, and I predict a huge winning margin for JannLee here, and he needs it if he's gonna have any kind of chance catching up the lead that Katask has in this tournament. Welcome Anti-C, maybe I don't know how to pronounce it. So the trick here is if you play at c6, you can simply take on d5, and this is taboo because of knight to c7. So already I don't like the black position here because his forces are not very well coordinated. The question though is how to utilize this as white. You could maybe trade a couple of pieces here and then start hunting the black queen, just putting your forces on the board, taking control. JannLee spending some time here figuring out how to get a solid advantage out of the opening. Damn, this Motorhead dark superior dark rum is just fine. JannLee spending a lot of time here. Okay, so he decides to go back. Let's see if that was a well invested minute on the clock. Maybe something happened. His cat was eating his mouse or something, I don't know. Anyway, so the knight on d5 is hanging, so black had better make a decision here. And if you take on c3, white will simply open up the d5. This is more natural maybe, hitting g2. But also it's a bit loose here on f2 because when the d pawn moves, the knight will be hanging. Rather than putting the king in danger, white calmly just protects the pawn on g2, and now what? No pieces in hand here, so actually playing g3 and allowing now g2 check would be a possibility. Because that knight is on g2 is a sitting duck. White could even just give his rook, play king f1 and take on g2 and then take with the king and just mend the holes around the king. And that is probably what he's going for here. So a huge space advantage here for white. And black needs to be really clever here to get something out of this opening. I'm not sure what to do. For instance, bishop g4 runs into bishop takes f7, I think, and then you have a discovered threat here. Now g7, g5 check and take on g4 doesn't look good. So this bishop is likely to get stuck behind the pawns here when black plays e6, because if you castle long, f7 is hanging. So I don't see a good move for black here. Maybe he should do something like, I don't know, h5, because this looks a bit passive. The bishop is trapped here behind the pawns, and now the h3 pawn is hanging, so white just wants to pick up the pawn and take on g2, and he'll be a piece and a pawn up. So some sort of quick action here by black is needed. But what to do? So putting pressure here on the bishop and also slight pressure here on the d pawn. Nice to see you guys. But I mean, you could just protect the bishop, I suppose. Maybe queen d3. My crystal ball is working just fine tonight. Just look out so you don't move the bishop, the knight from c3, so you allow queen e1 mate. But this is a strong threat now. If white can take on h3 unhindered, the knight on g2 will be hanging, and it's just all over. And not much time left here for mariorton. So increasing the pressure here on the bishop, but in a little while all the fun will be over, I think. Okay, so this actually threatens the queen and protects the pawn here on h3. That was clever. But even so, I think white might consider taking on g2 or taking h3 first. So a piece and a pawn for okay, but d4 is hanging here. Not so clear. The black pieces got out now, so he has some pressure. All the black pieces are active and the h-pawn is running up the board. Not so clear. And JannLee is running short on time. He needs to move faster. I just have a feeling that mariorton is not careful enough with his material here. It gives away too many pawns and too many... JannLee is just plugging those pawns everywhere. Wherever there's a hole, he puts a pawn, and his pieces are bound to take over the whole board. D4 is hanging though, watch out. I wonder why he didn't take on D4. I suppose neither player saw that the D4 pawn was hanging. Taking on E5 just shows some bad judgment here, because that pawn and the piece, the rook he got here, it costs black everything. Look, now he's picking up the knight here, and white is so solid. Nice move, threatening mate here, and he will demolish the black pawn structure. After which the queen can maybe land on A8 and wreak havoc. Hi there, Zaraza. Yeah, this is super duper nice for white. And this pins the B pawn, threatening knight takes C6, and black needs to give up a pawn. And look at how safe white is. All that defense around the white king. So now it's mate on B8. But I'm not sure about that game actually. At some point, let's have a quick look at some critical position there. Here in the opening, white was doing fine, I think, but then mariorton found some sort of way out here. Queen b4 was very clever indeed. But here, bishop c5, because if you take on c5, you have knight takes e5. That would have been really clever. And here, bishop b5 would have been strong. And remember, I mentioned don't take on go move that knight because of the mate here. So bishop b5 looks strong. And now actually black looks okay, more than okay. He has such strong piece play here, and black is just better here. Black should probably have castled. Okay, but what I don't understand here is why at some point, why didn't he just take on d4? I don't get it. Okay, anyway, JannLee turned it around. Yeah, JannLee is a really great defender. And once he got his king safe, it was just over. So this is a d4, d5 white king side fianchetto line. And not clear what that pawn sacrifice brings white. I think since JannLee is such a great defender, you need to be really careful so you don't just waste material for nothing, because he will make use of that extra pawn, I'm sure. He'll just get safe and then he will put his extra material to work. One interesting move here is maybe take on g3, because the dark squares are really weak here. That's the kind of move he just does on principle, JannLee. putting all his pieces in nice places. That bishop is a tremendous defender, and also his pieces are pointing towards the c2 pawn. Yeah, it reminds me of a game in the 1978 Olympics where the Chinese team facing Sweden, the Chinese not being that strong at that time, the Chinese player playing against Ulf Andersson, he actually sacrificed a pawn just to reach an endgame, an early endgame. And that was not a nice strategy. Maybe black will take here and then take on e2 and take here. I'm sure he'll consider that, because you get so much scope for these bishops then. Let's say take here, take on e2, check, and then take here, and then maybe put a pawn on e2. Yeah, I thought so too, Hopper, but yeah, I think f6 looked okay. Yeah, he's waiting to take on. He's waiting to take on c3. It just plugs another piece here on the long diagonal. Very nice centralization here of that knight. And if you look at the board, you see the black pieces are controlling 5 ranks, and the white pieces, well, one pawn actually crossed the 3rd rank, but white is really passive. Black has the space advantage, the extra material, looking really, really bad here for white. And what's really the worst part here is it's so hard to find a decent move here for white, whereas black has so many moves he can make. Just develop his rooks to even better squares. He has a pawn in hand. He can run the h pawn up the board, maybe just strengthen his grip. He's gonna play this just positionally. So I wouldn't want to be in Mariorton's place right now. Pawn down in a cramped position. So the knight, the once so proud knight on d4 might actually have to move now. But once this knight goes, there's a hole on e3. And let's say you play knight at e3, maybe d4 will come. And then white has some problems here on the dark squares. So instead he covers e3 with that passive bishop that actually threatens a7. And now's the time to blow a hole in the white castle wall. Black sacrificed a piece for a pawn, but he got the material back immediately. So are we back to the same position, more or less? I was going to say, just look out so you don't repeat the position here. That has happened before, to me at least. You have this super strong position and you just try to gain some time, and then whoops, you accidentally repeat the position One time too many. Okay, so this alters the position, puts the finger on a very soft spot here, threatening pawn and knight, and also maybe sometimes the rook here. That pawn on c5 won't help white much, because over here is where the action will take place pretty soon. So actually I was a bit surprised I didn't just pick up a3 there. Oh well, he has a very clear idea here too. Just keep pounding on the e2 pawn. And he could actually take here on e2 and then put a pawn on f3. Looks really strong. Yeah. And there's absolutely no defense here for... You can take the rook here, and a pawn is hanging here on h3. Okay, so he wants to put the pawn here and promote on f1. So he's thinking, will it help me if I take on f1 and promote to knight? Yeah, I agree with your analysis there. Cute little mating finish there in the end. PKR. Exactly. JannLee playing super safe, just picking up material and putting it to use. Well, there is a way to, if you have auto queen, which I have, you can press down, is it control? You press down control when you promote, so then you get to pick what you promote to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe it's better to turn off auto queen, because if we have any crazy house newbies here or bug house newbies, actually you do under promote quite a lot in crazy house and bug house, because you need to keep your initiative going, and if you can promote with check, it's very often good. So this is probably a very dubious opening by black. Very provocative. The queen is threatening this pawn, so this makes sense. Pressuring the white knight, that is protecting the pawn on e5. And the question is, how do you handle this? One way would be to simply maybe play d4 and recapture with the queen, but he prefers to sacrifice on f7. So he gave a piece for a pawn, and the black king has moved, so it won't be able to castle later in the game. But I think black should be fairly okay here. He has some pressure here down on the light squares. Maybe he could be brave and play h6. Yeah, I like that move. Even though it weakens the light squares even more, it puts the question to this knight, which is defending f3. And now, can you take on g2 and then play bishop at f3? I don't know. Or do you simply... What do you do here? Because if you take on g2 and plays the bishop here on f3, not only is the rook hanging and the queen, the knight on e4 is hanging also. So now the knight is hanging because this knight is pinned. And e6 blocked the view of this bishop, and that was probably not good. I realized that black really wanted this knight, but so what do you do here? Another idea would be to take on h4. So this threatens the queen and protects e5. And white is ready to pick up the knight now. Yeah, exactly, Opper. It was bad for black to lose the g4 pawn. That was his prime strength in the position. Now you can really tell that the light squares are weak and this knight is hanging. Let's say queen e5, you have pawn at f6 maybe, breaking the connection here between the pieces, and you can pick up h4. Yeah, exactly. So mariorton thinking a lot here. And he has a little tactical trick here, because if white takes here, you have knight at f3. So this is a useful move. If bishop d7, you could take on e6. The bishop check here covered c2, which probably is important. Can you take here on g6? Because queen h5, you have queen g4. I'm not sure why you didn't take on g6 actually. Does anyone in the audience see why he didn't take on g6? Yeah, I was just saying that. If you wonder why Opper's comments are sort of lagging, it's because the chat is a little behind. Ouch. Losing the knight on d4 will hurt, and now white only needs to get his pieces in the right positions, maybe queen and g1 just to take control here of the first rank. The rook here is probably heading back to g1, although this pawn is hanging now. That was curious. I don't know why he didn't play rook g1, just trapping the queen, but never mind. JannLee wins the game, and he's leading 4-0. So mariorton playing a slightly different opening here. The d pawn stays at d3 instead of d4, but he does fianchetto his light square bishop. The bishop check here is curious. Apparently he wants to provoke c3, denying the natural square for this knight. So this is just a super solid setup here for black. The extra tempo for white doesn't matter really. The knight will go back to h3 when white has a nice defensive setup. Yeah, I think you're right, Saxeter. If you're asking me, Midnight Fox, no, I don't play this. I don't fianchetto. I do fianchetto my light square bishop all the time in as white in chess, though. But I haven't quite starting doing that in Bug House. Maybe I should, and Crazy House. Maybe I should. So mariorton just playing some generic moves here. And black has a fine position. Not much happening right now. At some point white will play e4, but JannLee just sacrificed the piece on principle, and white is giving it back immediately. So another light squared bishop will land here on g2, I'm sure. So we're back to, is it the same position again? mariorton doesn't seem to know what to do. This move puts some pressure here and also protects the h4 square, so if black plays h4, maybe white can simply take on h4. JannLee is spending a lot of time here. Not quite finding the best solution. Wow. He's going all in here on the king's side. So possibly playing g4 the next move. White doesn't have anything in hand right now. But, I mean, you should probably play e4. So, black castling long. But castling long is always somewhat of a danger, because you have two squares here in the corner and the king isn't protecting the pawn here on h7, a7. So you could take here. The d5 pawn will be hanging, but then h3 is hanging. JannLee not going for an all-in attack here, just gaining some space advantage. And at the moment his pieces are closer to the white king than the white pieces are to his king. So If the position blows up with a lot of trades, it will most likely favor black. So now it's mariorton's turn to spend a lot of time. How to proceed? Well, opening the long diagonal makes a lot of sense. So this puts pressure on the d5 pawn. This I don't understand at all. I thought the bishop here on h3 was a very important piece. Surely white cannot afford playing like this. He gave up a piece and he's just putting his pawns here. Black can switch to playing chess here, where he will be a piece up. And those pawns, he showed his hand too early. He won't have any pieces to play with when black switches his interest over to the queen side instead. So this little trick saves the piece here on e6, because when white takes here, you take back with the bishop. And this is a very instructive position. You might think that white is super safe. Sure he is. But I predict, looking in my crystal ball here, that in 20 moves, the action will start somewhere here, maybe on the second rank, over here on the queen side, where okay, so JannLee gives back a piece. Was that really necessary? Okay, so he's still thinking he will crash through on the king side. I'm not sure that was the best decision actually. Because I think it was Steinitz who once declared that you should attack your opponent's weaknesses rather than his strengths. Wow, giving up a queen here just to demolish the defense, threatening mate here, so you get back the material. And now indeed it does look like black has crashed through. So black needs to be careful here about rooks landing maybe on f1 or g1 or somewhere, or d1. Okay, and mariorton overstepped the time limit there. Mariorton sticks to his d4, d5 opening. So I suppose it's his game plan. And he did get a decent game before, with the pawn on g4 attacking the knight and the queen hitting e5. I think in that game JannLee played bishop c4, but maybe it's good to keep that bishop at home because it protects g2. and sort of protects h3 as well. This is an interesting pawn sacrifice. Just kicking the black queen around, bringing the rook out with tempo. Sometimes you see this in chess as well against the Scandinavian. Actually, it's not so easy to find a safe place for the black queen. If you play queen c5, the queen is already trapped after rook b5. A bit unusual to see JannLee sacrificing material, but he is gaining a lot of momentum here. And if we play knight d5, it's hard to protect c7. Really, really hard. And king d8 is not a move you want to play. Definitely not. And look out, that knight might be going to f4. And this queen is in danger of being trapped. Oh, thank you, Linus, so much for subscribing, Midnight Fox. So maybe this is the time to play knight f4. Queen goes here. No, you don't have the pawn for g5, sorry. So what do you do here? Not so easy. Although it is a bit tempting to take here on g4. You do have an attack here with the knight and bishop. Can you put the pawn to use somewhere? Maybe pawn f6. But it's probably not enough. Oh, great. Good to see you, gingerbread man. I'm just fine. Having a glass of Coke with something else in and watching Bughouse, JannLee. Hope you're good too. I didn't see anyone who signed up for the Bughouse tournament, but I will probably be commenting the Bughouse tournament. I've never commented any Bughouse tournament ever, but unlike Crazy House, I do know a little something about Bughouse, and it will be great to watch the best players battle it out in Bughouse. So the black king has his balls to the wall here on d8. Very hard to defend this. This is the Candidates tournament, gingerbread man. And it's a round 7 game. All right, I will check it out, the Bughouse tournament. So, yeah, taking on f3 would have been better, most likely. Because this is the thing in Crazy and Bug House, that once you breach the 6th rank, it's not possible anymore to defend from behind with pawns. So now the queen isn't threatening h1 anymore, and you can take on g4. And black needs to take with the queen because this pawn was pinned. Both players low. White toying a bit here with his rook back and forth, attacking the queen. And I wonder how wise it was to give up the queen there. So JannLee actually in a bit of problems here in the end. Wow. mariorton overstepping the time limit. But how was the final position? Yeah, black is actually slightly better here. So, hard fought game. But JannLee prevails. Once again, it's 6-0. And in this game, mariorton hasn't decided yet where to put his d-pawn. But once again, he goes for d3. And I don't think this is the correct strategy to play against JannLee. So trading this bishop for the knight weakens the light squares a bit. But seems like white changed his plan in the middle of everything. I don't like the way the bishop sits here, because it's bound to be attacked by a knight here on g4 at some point, or by a pawn here. It's simply not a good spot for the bishop. And white gives up a piece here for very dubious compensation. Let's say bishop at e5, yeah, hitting g3 and b2, and black would probably just take on g3. Exchanging a piece for 2 pawns. But you can keep that in store for later. It's no rush. Taking on h2 was an even stronger threat, so white protects g3. But maybe h4, h5, h4 is good here, where you could take and then push the h-pawn maybe. So pressure here on f2. And e3 looks natural. But then maybe black can simply take on e3. Pawn takes, knight takes. So white got his material back here, but black is so active. And he has the B file. B2 is actually hanging here. So JannLee, being the strong defender that he is, he could just be a bit materialistic and pick up pawn for free. Okay, so what is happening here? I'm thinking at some point black might consider just taking here on h2 and king takes and knight g4 check and maybe a pawn on e3. Yeah, he has spotted the weaknesses on the dark squares. And now h3 is weak, as well as, well, he's weak on both g2 and f2. Yeah, I played Dovijanic many times. I know he plays this. I simply don't like the white position after take f2 and then knight g4. This is just bad for white. You should probably just leave the pawn here. Maybe knight at h5, try to get some sort of attack. Okay, yeah, he goes for the g7 pawn. Actually threatening knight f6 check. So a very instructive move. You don't waste time taking on f2. That would be too passive. White has to create some sort of counterplay here. And this is a natural move. You just put the pawn here on f6, the weak square. And now you can return to maybe taking on g1 or preparing it first. Because now taking on g2 and then pawn f2 would be strong. Instead, white gives up his bishop on h6, and if we count the material here, it's more or less equal, but these bishops look very powerful. Maybe a bishop here on e3. Oh, he just goes for the white queen here. Nice. And white resigned. 7-0. Will mariorton win even one game? So JannLee just trying something else here. And this is of course quite okay for black, who gets to place his bishop outside of the pawn chain. You need to be a little careful here as white, so you don't allow some quick knight excursion here, picking up c2. That would be ridiculous. So white is simply aiming to castle. Although sometimes you can now, as black, take here and take on d4. Then it would be maybe check here, would be nasty. So just to avoid any pseudo sacrifices on d4 or c2, white spends the move protecting d4. What does TIL mean? I'm asking an entire sleeve. I'm not familiar with that acronym. Black is playing sensibly here, I think. And should be more or less okay. With the knight here on g3, you need to be careful. So, today I learned. Well, I don't speak Croatian or any Serb, but I think it's Dovijanic. That is my guess anyway. So this is a nice spot for the knight. Putting pressure here on g2. Although a big problem for black here is that he has less space. So his moves will be depleted before the white moves are. You probably need to play bishop b4 and trade here, yeah. Try to make use of the weakened light squares. Maybe rook b1, anticipating bishop takes c3. This move controls f5. But on the other hand, if you, let's say you take here, take knight e4, putting pressure on this knight, sometimes this h-pawn could be fast. Thank you so much. Today I learned what TIL means. Yeah, Opper is mentioning another idea here. Just to relocate this knight. It's rather passive here, sitting on c6. And it's probably a much better place to put it on, just to control f5. Then this wouldn't have happened. And this could quickly be really dangerous here for black. I don't like the castling idea here for black at all. The question is, do you take with the bishop or do you even take with the rook here? Yeah, he takes with the rook. And these bishops are controlling the entire king side. And you can maybe place your queen somewhere here and bring the other rook over, and that one rook is missing. It won't even, no one will notice. And this is a move I don't like at all, because you show your hand too early, and these dark squares, h6 and f6, just got more weak than they were before. This is actually hindering the black king in the defense. So a pawn landing on h6 will be even stronger now that the pawn is on g6. So yeah, maybe knight f3, you threaten to take here and play bishop g5, trapping the queen, or more or less trapping it. And you had to be careful there, because if you take and put the bishop here, maybe black could sacrifice on h3. It's a nice little cavalry shock here by white. Who's just building up that pressure. Material is equal, but how to counter the attack on the dark squares here? Well, okay. Hiding in the corner was not the way. And made in a couple of moves here. Checkmate. Black put his baby in the corner. It's 8-0, JannLee. And this time mariorton wisely puts his pawn on d4 rather than d3. And JannLee handles this in a very conventional way, trading on f3 just to create a weakness here on d4. Not so easy to protect this. And also attacking the g3 pawn. And maybe he's ready to take already. He likes to prepare a little bit. So if you compare these pieces to the white pieces here, this bishop is restricted, it's defending d4, and this is restricted also. These light pieces have greater freedom. I'm already liking black here. And this is a nifty little maneuver, putting the king in the corner and the rook here, actually making the black king a little bit safer. Just connecting the rooks here. This rook is ready to go to maybe e8 or f8. I'm not sure what is the best spot. And I think JannLee would love to have white take on d6 so he can strengthen his center and control the e5 square. So maybe black will start pushing his pawns here. With the queen on d7, you don't need to fear the weakened 7th rank, because the queen is covering a lot of squares here. Notice that white doesn't have anything in hand. So black has some extra flexibility with his knight in hand. You might consider swinging the knight over here also. Although putting the knight in front of the pawns here doesn't make much sense. Okay, so he goes for e5 instead. And Oprah mentioned another idea, just to preserve that bishop. I think white is okay here. position looks balanced. And now that the position is open, the rooks don't look quite as healthy as they did before, when the position was closed. So this looks perfectly fine, but why put the bishop here instead of on g4? I don't get it. This is too passive once again, I think. These guys are just looking at each other, controlling a diagonal that doesn't mean much. And black will probably just take on g3 as well, and put his pawns here on f4, and black has compensation here for sure. So 2 pieces for 2 pawns. And where is the idea behind this? I'm not quite sure. So black wants to use his pieces on the board rather than wasting his pieces that are already there. So the space advantage in itself is probably a compensation for the material that he lost. So maybe threatening to take here and put another knight on f4. What do you do here? JannLee wants to have everything under control, hoping for pawn takes, knight takes, when all his pieces will be super active. And otherwise he will just place his bishop on e2, I think. The only real danger here for black is the g6 square. So I don't know, bishop d3. Is that a move? Now white has a lot of light pieces. Threatening mate here, wanting to take on f2 probably, just to open a gap here for the white queen. And can you check here on d1 with the queen maybe, just to trade loads? White got the chance to play knight g5, threatening knight f7 check. And do you have knight here? Okay, so mating threats. Wow, what is happening here? White was threatening to mate on g6 here. Once again threatening mate on g6. And this is simply not good for black, because the mating threat is still there, the knight is hanging, and this is over. And when I say over, you will see JannLee fight till the end, of course. So once this pawn goes away, there's no more threats. No, 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 mariorton, what did you do? You lost on time. You lost on time. Poor mariorton. You were, let me guess, that was plus 50 or something. Okay. What do you think? How much plus was it? 47, 48, 49, 50. Yeah, plus 50. Okay. Oh well. And the longer the computer gets to think, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. No, 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 no. It's 9-0 JannLee, and we get the same opening line as in the previous game. And now, actually, black sacrifices a pawn here on h5. Although notice that d4 is hanging as well. So maybe knight takes d4. Is that a move? Black has some tricks here along the h5. Also, the d pawn is hanging. But I mean, trading queens here is dangerous because the black king is sort of naked. Yeah, Midnight folks, I'm very proud of my assessment there. Plus 50. So actually I kind of like black's opening idea here. He's very active. Maybe a knight here on f5. Threatening d4. Also threatening to take this guy, which leaves h2 hanging. So he wants to bring this knight to f5, but that's rather slow, I think. Why not just play knight at f5 immediately? So definitely knight f5. Okay, maybe not definitely. This looks strong actually. Threatening the knight, also threatening pawn at e2. If you're asking me, PKR, actually I think Bobby Fischer made a good point back in the 60s. He didn't like the candidates format because sometimes players will know that they don't have any chance anymore, and if they play other players at various points, I mean, it's a different. There's a difference between playing a player that has given up and someone who has something to fight for. So the round robin is not ideal. I think it should be decided in matches. Maybe the top 4 could go to semifinals or something. Also, I think 13 players that's just too much. Yeah, and that's another good point. You want the best match player to play in the finals, rather than the guy who is the best at beating the tail enders. So I think Black played this too slowly. He had an excellent position, I think. Certainly it's super entertaining with this format. Absolutely. And so when it comes to entertainment, it's way better than any format, I think. Yeah, you're right, Opper. I mean, Katask will win this tournament, and he deserves to play Yasugi for the world title. Well, the winner of JannLee and Katask will have eternal glory, for sure. And that's not so bad. But what's actually quite bad here is probably JannLee's position, because you have pawn at e2 here. I don't like this at all. For Black, you could even hide here on g8 maybe. Do what you do. So what is happening here? White can play rook h8 if Black stays on the 8th. White is super weak here now on the first rank. So he brought his bishop to defend. And it looks like Black has a winning attack here, finally. A lot of pieces entering the fray here. And I was thinking just put a rook here on the first rank. Would have been a killer. But this is indeed winning for mariorton, who got his point finally. He deserved it. So let's have a look at the last game. See what the computer says. Here it doesn't like e5, and to be quite frank, I don't like it either. But JannLee just plays it to get a position. And here, yeah, the computer likes h5, and this guy is a problem child for White. He doesn't have any good place to run to when the h pawn moves up the board. And taking on h5 is really, really risky. queen h4 might be even stronger than what black played here. So this actually looks quite okay, and as Opper pointed out, taking on d4 looks good for black. I was thinking knight f5, but maybe it's just bad. Yeah, because you cannot take here because it's check. But this looks slow, and b5, pawn of b5 was super bad. Bishop c4, really strong move here, picking up material. Pawn at h3 looked devastating here, but going back with the king here, it's just too slow. Why? Okay. So knight f4 mistake, and this position is winning for black. And what was the best move here? Taking on f1 looked strong, yeah. And now taking on f1 looks strong again. And why not simply take on f1 here? Take on f1. Because white has nothing. The king just hides on d7. It's actually made in 5. Rook at d1. But this is just over. Okay. Well, good to see that so many came to watch, even though I didn't know when I woke up this morning I would be commenting Crazy House today. Congratulations to JannLee winning this match convincingly 9-1. And what happens, oh, that was the wrong one. What happens here in the tournament? We have Katask in the lead when it comes to game percentage, and that's really what it's all about. He has more matches remaining than JannLee and Blitzbullet and Opperwesen actually, and if we look at the standings here, we see Opperwesen in the lead, but Katask will overtake him already this weekend, because if we take a quick look here at what is happening on Saturday, what a super Saturday we can look forward to, because JannLee is playing Blitzbullet and Katask, so that will be two very fine matches to watch on Saturday. And I cannot promise for sure, but I will do everything I can to be here and live stream this event for you. And I don't want to miss out on JannLee Katask for the world. Yeah, JannLee versus Blitzbullet, also a very nice match. Blitzbullet here in 4th place in points, and in 3rd place actually when it comes to game percentage. Okay, let me just finally see if we can raid someone. Do we have anyone we can raid? See if one of my friends are online streaming, and they will get a little surprise.